Tonight it is my pleasure and my great honor to introduce you to Marina Tabassum, who's coming from Dhaka, Bangladesh. I was introduced to her work by a dear friend and colleague, Nick, who used to teach here in this university for a few years, and who showed me some of your buildings. And I must tell you, I was completely shocked. I was shocked because it was so direct, it was so fresh, poetical, and I was wondering, how is it possible today to build with concrete, with brick, in such a way? So then, we started to shape that plan to invite you on Bay. This day is today. I'm really happy that you're here. As I said, Nick already had a contact with Dhaka, and after 3 semesters of teaching in the master, he went with the students, with the master students. Well, actually, they had a project in Dhaka, which was a huge transportation hub, a bus terminal, a jetty for ferries, and a train station. Huge program. And after working for some weeks here, the students Nick took the students to Dhaka. Nick told me that you were always asking where the people on the drawings. We are not as many in Switzerland, and we tend to forget drawing people. So this was our first academic collaboration, exchange, and well, I hope that we can continue in some way. Just to introduce Marina, just last year, 2016, she's won the prestigious Agha Khan Award, which is a huge achievement. And therefore it is also even, I think it is more and more difficult to get you. So again, thank you for being here. Marina is a guest professor at the BRAC University in Dhaka and academic director of the Bengal Institute for Architecture, Landscapes and Settlements in Dhaka. Of course, she has the principal of her own office called MTA, Marina Tabassum Architects. And I will not miss the opportunity to make a forecast to November, where Nick is organizing together with you in the Swiss Architecture Museum SI in Basel, a big show, and there will also be talks, and you will be present at that time. So I think it will be another opportunity to meet you and the work then on a different scale, and I hope also with some models maybe and drawings. So please welcome Marina Tabassum.
Quite often when I am going to do these talks, I'm asked where was I trained, and I quite proudly say that I'm organic, because I'm entirely from Bangladesh. I studied, of course, my formative years were in a school, which was, though I claim to be organic, I don't know how organic would you call it, because my school was an American missionary school. So I was exposed to all kind of multicultural, religious atmosphere from a very childhood. We used to go to chapel, and not to pray, but just for the fun of it. And yeah, we had one Buddhist girl in our class, and we had no Buddhist teacher, so when there was a religion class, she was studying Islam. But of course, all kinds of interesting things that took place as a child, and was exposed to a lot of different things. And my architecture was from a school at that time, the only school in Bangladesh that offered architecture, and there were only 50 students that were allowed from 3,000 students, and that was really difficult to get in. So I was fortunate enough to be able to study architecture, but the school was actually set up by Texas A&M in the 1960s. So even the architecture school was American. In a way, the education was entirely modernist to some extent, so I could emulate Richard Meyer, Tadawando, all kinds of architects quite easily, as we all do, right? As students, we try to see these and get inspired. And then I graduated in mid-90s. And then, of course, when I got into practice, that's when I think the first thing that hit me was what would be my language of architecture. Because I've never been to America, but all my trainings were kind of Americanized in a way. So I think that was the first time when I started looking into this whole notion of who am I, the identity, or what is me, and what is the uniqueness of my being in a place where I come from. And I think that diversity and the uniqueness of a place makes us who we are. And I think that's very important to find out. So that's why I would start, and what I start with is with the place I come from. I come from Bangladesh, and you can see it's a green land, very, very green. This area, which is the Himalayan range, and it's right down from the Himalayan range. This is the Ganges Delta, formed by two major rivers, which is Brahmaputra, coming out of here, and the Ganges from here. So Brahmaputra and Ganges flowing into Bay of Bengal, over years, centuries, accumulating silt, created this land, which is entirely delta. 2/3 of my country is delta. It is 150,000 square kilometers of land, and 2/3 of it is made out of delta. So it's crisscrossing with rivers, lots of rivers, large ones, small ones, different kind of rivers. About more than 700 rivers are there. The earth is absolutely soft and fragile. You can see from the image here how fragile and soft it is. And because the rivers are so mighty that once they change their courses, they erode the banks. And again, in some places, it emerges. So there's a constant fluidity in the landscape. It's either eroding in some place or it's emerging in some place. So this is a constant play. And so water and land is nothing, there is no distinct line or border between land and water. Land could become water, water can become land. And even during the year, all year round, we have two seasons. One is the dry season, the other is the wet season, the monsoon. So during monsoon, what you see here is all water. Everything goes underwater. And during the dry season, the water goes away and it becomes farmland and people start farming. The earth is absolutely very, very rich because it's alluvial soil. And it's almost like magic. You just need to throw some seeds and trees come out. So, so it's in that sense we are very, very lucky. And as I said, there are more than 700 rivers. So water is a major, major source of life and living. And it's also this notion of impermanence is quite strong, because what is water is land and what is land is water. Turns people into, gives this impermanence. And people do not tend to see more than a year's time. Nobody makes plan for 5 years. 10 years you can forget. Because 1 year is the maximum period of making plans. You know, that's it. Because within a year, a lot of things changes. Your location of your house can change. A lot of things can change. So 1 year is probably the maximum span of any kind of planning. So this is an interesting image, and I think which is interesting because you see there's a lot of negotiation that takes place because of the shifting landscape. Negotiation, appropriation, and optimization. These are the three principles I think people live by. Here what you see as green is actually not green, it's actually water. And what you see as green is water hyacinth. And water hyacinth, quite often when there is lack of flow in the water, starts to grow and it clogs the riverways. So then you cannot take your boat from one side to the other side. So the boatmen bring their boats together and creates a boat bridge. And then they charge something like 2 takas, which is probably 2 cents to get people from one side to the other. So this is how you negotiate with the land and the landscape. And optimizing minimum and basic as much as needed, not more, not less. So you can see you don't need a big salon. You can just have a small plate and a few things and you could become a hairdresser. So the climate, that's also something very important to see. Tropic of Cancer actually cuts through Bangladesh. You see here? And that's why we are a subtropical climate. Half of the year is monsoon, the half is dry season for us. During the summer months, it's very high humidity. Temperature can go up to 40 degrees, but that's very rare. Generally, it stays within 36, 37. And we have a very moderate winter, which never goes beyond 10 degrees. So average temperature would be something like 29, 30 degrees all year round. So summer rain is something we cherish, we enjoy, because during summer months when you get rain, it's something we absolutely love and it's celebrated everywhere. And dry season can be really dusty because our earth is so soft and fragile, it's almost like powder. So when there is no rain for a few months, it becomes very, very dusty. So in this moderate kind of a temperature where there is the only obstacle for us is the high humidity, all you basically need is a roof to cover your head and shade you from the sun, and a plinth so that you don't get, the water doesn't rise to your level. So a plinth and a roof, and that's all you need for architecture. And that's why the edges, like what you have here, let's say in Europe, quite often you need a lot of layers of insulations and covering, keeping you away from the elements. We don't really require that. All we need is a buffer, enough space, that is the place where we live. So this blurring of the edges is something which I found is unique of my place. And that's why quite often I try to open up the edges so what is outside or outdoors can become indoors, what is indoor can become an outdoor space. It's indoor, again it's not indoor because you can open it up entirely and it can be a veranda or a pavilion. Similarly, if you open this up, the doors, it can open into that space. So this is one of my very first projects that I did, and I think this was a project where I kind of found my language in the way that I want to work with the architecture, where the architecture breathes. It breathes so that that's how it should be. This project, which was done in 1998, you know, at that time there was no air conditioning, no fan, and it was absolutely livable space because of its openness and the draft of air that is created. Only for maybe very few days when the temperature would rise really high, then you would need a pedestal fan, otherwise it was absolutely wonderfully livable. And so, you know, that was just a small apartment project, but when you go for a building where you have floors that you need to stack up, like a 12-story residential block, which is actually right here. It's a project which is a residential building. My only developer-built project. I generally do not work for developers, but this one I took it as a challenge in a way, because you see this road here. This is the north-south spine of Dhaka city, and this is probably the only spine that we have. So quite often when you have to go from north to south, you have to sit there in jam for 2-3 hours. And Dhaka, as you know, is a mega city, and it's increasing rapidly. We have 16 million people living in the city. 16 million people in 300 square kilometer area. So this gets really very, very, you know, you can really spend a lot of time sitting in the jam. And that's where the site was located, right on there. A residential block. We knew it will never be used as a residential block. People won't live on a street like that. But the zoning code tells that it has to be residential. So this was my design for that plot. We tried to open up the edges, as I said, that the building needs to be ventilated. So I opened up the facade on the edges, and the road is right here. A road goes here, and the secondary road goes here. And these are 2 apartment blocks. On each floor there are 2 apartments, and you have the core in the middle. And the east and west is opened up so that there is enough ventilation that's taken in. And you can see the jam of Dhaka city, and you see the building. Basically the idea was to create a facade which is a city facade. It's not for the people who are living in the building. There are 20 families living in the building. But we thought that for the city, it should be something to look at. It should not be just a few balconies where people just stand and look at jams. It's not needed. But it would be an interesting idea to play with the facade, so that you at the same time when you are bringing in air into the building, making it breathable, it can also give back something to the city. So that's what the building was for the developers. They need renderings, so that was the rendering, and that's the building, what it looks like, the side facades. So I like opening up my buildings a lot. And this one was a small project where it was right next to a brick kiln, where we used the brick kiln idea, took it like a capsule. And it was a small space where somebody who's working in the brick kiln, like an engineer or someone who needs to stay there for the night, they could go and stay there. So the whole construction was designed out of the brick kiln idea, and this was what we came up with. Cutting it open so that there is enough airflow that takes place, but at the same time retaining that formal integrity of a capsule. So courtyards are again one of the very important elements in our landscape where we come from. Courtyards are more or less like the heart of a house. This is the house where I grew up. So this is my courtyard. And generally around the courtyard you have verandas, and that's the place where people live their life. That's the place where you take the air in. And the way it works is basically you have this shaft, and it creates a draft of air. And the draft actually, as the hot air goes up, it creates low pressure, and air comes in from the sides. So that was an idea I took also for this building here, where this courtyard was made into a long shaft, and air could move into that space. That's where you see the plan, the section here, the courtyard, and these are the extra spaces. So it created that ventilation. That's from the top. And I think I showed you earlier before this. So to show a few of my courtyard projects, this is one. This was not built, but we won first prize for this project. It's a French-German embassy. So in Dhaka, because of scarcity of land, French had the land and the Germans had the money. So basically, they decided to combine and build an embassy, which is French-German embassy. The site is located right here. That's the American embassy here. The Canadian embassy is right here. That's the Chinese embassy, Thai embassy, that's the British embassy. Swiss embassy is somewhere around here. So, what the site was, this was a competition, a close competition. As you know, the embassies are generally a very high security area. So the brief said that it has to have 25 meters setback from all sides. So we thought that, okay, since it's an embassy, we will give two embassies two spaces so that they can retain their uniqueness. But that was not a possibility, because when you have 25 meter setbacks, you end up with a very small footprint. And so that was the footprint we had. These edges where you could put the services, the passport or visa section, those were allowed, but the high security zone where the ambassador would sit and all the other offices, that would have to be within that small footprint. So what we did was we created that footprint here. This is the ground floor plan, where you see the road is on this side. So this is the place where we had the high security zone. And the rest of the cafeteria, the passport section, services, the parking were all on these edges. And as you see that I've again created a courtyard in the middle so that there is enough airflow that can take place, there's enough light, and all the offices are actually on the sides. And they did not, and since there were stacks of floors and people would look into the building, they didn't want that. They didn't want people to would be able to look into the buildings. So we created this, we cut the corners to be able to bring in light and air, but again, not for people to see within. So you see the section here where you see the court, which would, though the building would be air conditioned, but we thought, in Dhaka, you can have during summer days, it could be like you don't have 2-3 hours of electricity. So would be nice if they would take advantage of that natural ventilation. So this is what the building we proposed, but later on it was given to a French architect. Now it's coming to an end almost. Sad for me because it was a scheme which I was very fond of. Another small courtyard. It's a very small weekend house to the outskirts of Taka. A 9 square plan, that was the site. There's a water body here. So what it is, it's a 9 square plan. The center is a courtyard and all the corners are courtyards. So all the rest of the spaces are actually spaces where the different functions are placed. So this is that little building made out of brick. And you see these are the small courts here. That's one of the courts that actually helps the ventilation of the building. And on top of the building is all these pavilion spaces where generally on an afternoon you could sit and enjoy the view. So brick is a material for us because we don't have any stone. We only have earth. And with earth you can either do mud buildings or you can bake them and turn it into brick and use it for your building. So the most available material for us is brick. And with brick, you can see in the landscape there are beautiful architecture that has already been made. This is a Hindu temple, beautiful terracotta works, all done in brick and baked brick. And we have wonderful brick masons who do really exquisite, beautiful brickwork over centuries. And the monastery that I showed you earlier, this one, is a 16th century monastery, Buddhist monastery. And we have quite a few of these Buddhist monasteries in Bengal. So these are my masons who does most of my brickworks. The buildings that I've shown and projects that I'm working on. They come from the north part of Bangladesh. And in the northern part of Bangladesh, there are really good masons that come out of that place. And this is again one of the projects. One thing, what is unique about the way we construct is all buildings are handmade. Everything is handcrafted. So there is, if you go to a building site, you rarely see any machines being used. Everything is, people are carrying things on their head or breaking things with their hand or placing every single brick to doing concrete. Most of the things are done with hands. So handcrafting is something which is unique. And handcrafting comes with its imperfections. And imperfection is a beauty. I think it's an audacity to say it to the Swiss. but it is, for us, this imperfection is something that we cherish. And that's the table that you see that we did in a handcrafting. This guy is my terrazzo and floor person who does all the different kind of material work. And so you see here, sitting with his little machine, cutting, and that thing was built entirely by him with his own hands. So handcrafting is something what makes the architecture unique. And also you need to understand, these people are just skilled workers. They've been working on these kind of skills for ages, from their childhood till the day, as now you see him old. But they don't have any education, they cannot read any drawings. So an architect needs to connect with them absolutely one-to-one. You cannot give a drawing to a site engineer and tell them, okay, just get this thing built. That doesn't work. You need to inspire them, because whatever you draw, if you want it to be built, you need to have a good connection with the workers who are working on site, because it's their hand that is turning your line into a wall. So that relationship is absolutely very unique and very important. So quite often you'll see that there are no drawings. We go to the site and we make drawings and try to make them understand how it is and everything. This is Dhaka. This land over here, what you see, it's Dhaka. Dhaka is the capital of Bangladesh. And all you see around is water body, low-lying lands. And this area, which is lined on the edges by water, here by a river and another river coming from this side, is absolutely packed with people. 45,000 people per square kilometer. That's the density of Taka. And you'll see all kinds of settlements, informal settlements, of course the city growing. So the informality is something we need to address. We need to address the chaos. And whenever I have a project in the city, my answer to this whole informal way of building and this chaos is to bring order. So I try to bring order. Wherever I get a chance, with a small project, I try to bring order into the place. So this is one project I'll show you, which is now under construction, towards completion, I would say. which is around this area. This is the southern part of Dhaka, which is densely populated. And there is hardly any facilities that are there. So I got a chance to design a community center. And the way the project came, it was quite weird, because the member of the parliament, who is a minister at the moment, gave me a call, and it was his election pledge that he would give them community center, he would make schools, you know, they make all these promises. So one of his promise was to make a community center. So he wanted me to just design a community center. He gave me a site and said that, I want you to design a community center, I'm giving you 2 weeks, just give me a few nice 3Ds, and you know, we'll see how it goes. Okay, so we worked hard. On 2 weeks, we made some 3Ds. We gave him the drawings. I thought, that's okay, done. He's not going to bother me for a while. But then after 3 years, when we have already forgotten about it, came a phone call from the government saying that we need a few details. I said, what? What detail? And what project are you talking about? I said, well, we've already done the foundation, but we need some details. So that's how you know, you throw some seeds and pops out the trees. That's how architecture happens in Bangladesh. So this is the site we got, and that was, in a way, I didn't even bother to visit the site because I wasn't thinking this was going to be built, right? It was just a few 3Ds. So we designed the building, as I always do, with this addressing this order in chaos. And it was basically a community center where they needed some spaces where people can gather. They can have some, you know, different kind of programs or events or even classes, workshops. So we had all the services at the back. We had the spaces stacked up a few floors, like that. We had an atrium, and these are the floors basically. A few 3Ds that we made and gave it to them. This was a small plaza in front of it, whatever little space we could bring out, because there is no space. It's so tightly, densely built. And this was the 3D I gave him, basically, within 2 weeks. And this is how it's coming up right now. You see that it's kind of really built up, all the edges. So it's under construction, and well, I had to go to the site when I got the phone call that the foundation was already done. And I went there and I saw the 3D in a huge, big billboard with my name on it. Everybody knew my name even before I was on the site. So that was really difficult. So I had to really come up with something at the end. So yeah, so hopefully that's how the building is looking. And I mean, it's not looking that bad. I mean, the spaces are okay. Okay, now to come to Bangladesh's history, how Bangladesh came into being. It's important to know because the next project I show you is something to do with that. So you know this is the Indian subcontinent. These two maps are showing during the British Empire when the Indian subcontinent was under the British colonial rule. These two maps actually show the population of Hindu and Muslim. So the greens are the greens are the Muslim population, and the red one is the Hindu population. So the darker the green, the density shows the density, and the light is showing less density. Same with the red one. The dense red shows the high density Hindu areas. And based on this, the whole Indian subcontinent was divided into three parts. The part here, which is dark green, was East Pakistan, and the dark green here was the West Pakistan, and the middle ground is India. So that's how it was divided when the British left the subcontinent. And what happened was this whole breaking of the subcontinent happened in 2 weeks. So there was a huge mass migration, forced mass migration that took place. Hindus who were living in the Pakistan area had to leave to India, and those Muslims who were living in the Indian area had to move, and this was done in a chaos within a night. People lost everything, left behind everything, and they were just running with their lives. So this is a part of history that's not discussed very often. We don't talk about it, but this partition of 1947 is one of the most unique point in history for us. So Bangladesh, before becoming Bangladesh, was East Pakistan. And my history is that I come from this little pocket here. This red line that you see is Bengal, because Bengal got divided. There were three regions of the whole Indian subcontinent that was broken. One was Punjab, Kashmir, and Bengal. So Bengal was divided, and that was the line that came up. And my family actually comes from this little pocket here. And so we had to move from here to here in Dhaka. And this is a small base of a hookah. You know hookah? Shisha? Yeah. So that's the base of a shisha. And my dad claims that they had 25 of these, gilded with silver. And so he was, I don't know why, a 6-year-old boy would bring a base of a hookah, but he did. But this is the only thing we have of our family history. But from 47 to 1971 was a history of struggle between East Pakistan and West Pakistan, because except for religion, we shared nothing. We did not share the same language, we did not share the same culture, our histories were not entirely the same. So there was a constant struggle between the two parts. And that ended up with a war in 1971. Pakistan is claiming it as a civil war, Bangladesh is claiming it as a liberation war. And so, as you see here, a struggle. And from 1971, March 25th, which is upcoming, 26th of March is our Independence Day, till 16th of December is when we won victory. So it was a 9-month-long intense war. People were killed, there were genocides, intellectuals were killed. A huge section of intellectuals were killed by Pakistani army, seeking them out from different places. So Bangladesh, after its liberation from 70s onwards, had a time which was absolutely void of any intellectual upbringing. So, you know, my country is younger than me, basically, but so you can imagine how young it is. But the thing is, we had our struggles, and those struggles are something that we are trying to come out of at this point in time. So in 1971, we won the war and we became free. And in 1997, the government declared a competition, which was a competition for our Liberation War Museum. We call it Museum of Independence, and our monument to independence. And I was in my second year after my graduation, and we decided to participate in the competition because it was an open competition, and we won the competition. So I was quite young at that time, in my 20s, when I won this very, very prestigious competition. So let me tell you, this is as you see Dhaka, and if you see there is not many green areas left. That's the Parliament complex, which is done by Agha Khan. This is again another small green area that is actually the only, that's another. And there are some other smaller green areas that are left. This was the site that was given to us. And so, and it's a park which is generally, people are going and enjoying, and one of the rare green areas that is left in the city. So our idea was that, you know, you want to build a museum within a park. That's not really a very wise idea. But then again, this site was also historically quite important because this is the site where this whole war was triggered. This is our leader at that time, who Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, we call him the father of the nation. And he actually declared that we need to be free, we will declare war. This was also, in the British time, was a horse racing ground. And again, in December 1971, this is where the Pakistani forces surrendered to the Allied forces, so the war was over. So in that sense, this site makes all senses. But at the same time, this is a park. So that became quite a difficult point. This here you see, it's one of our Occupy movements when it was in fashion. So that happened once with some of the political issues where people gathered. So this is also a place where people actually gather. If you call a city center, this is it. So what we did was, our design idea was to keep the park as it is and just take the minimum footprint that is required for the museum and to create that space, and that's what we did. We did not take the whole ground, but made a very minimal intervention into that. So that's what you see here, the park. There's a children's park that still remains. We created a walkway around it. And if you see, this is the plan. This is an existing thing already there. So what we did was we created a connection and a plaza, basically. So that's our plan of the museum. The way we thought about it, as you now have heard the history of Bangladesh, when you have, like, let's say, the kind of independence we had, it is not only about celebration, it's also about losing, it's also about loss and sacrifice of a generation of people. So there is this duality that exists. So we thought that if we talk about freedom, talk about celebration, it's always on the upper level. So freedom, dream, aspiration that prefers an upward direction is up there. And memories or sadness or the history is actually something that is embedded into the earth, so we made it subterranean. So the museum, what you see, is under the grade, it's below grade, so it keeps the horizontality of the park, it does not hinder that horizontality of park, and the only element is the tower, which is the Independence Tower. And the entire thing was taken below grade. So these are all the different elements that you see here. Every element has a reason for it. So we thought of it as a journey. So you go up the plaza. This is a plaza for celebration. As you encounter a circular water body in the middle, which actually draws its water within itself. This is actually what would I say? It's the 9-month-long war that we had, so it symbolizes that. The wall takes you down into the museum. So once you're up here, you go down to the museum, you go through the exhibits, and then you come up, and then you go to the tower. That was how we designed it. This is the plan of the museum underground. Those are the ramp taking you down. This is the audiovisual room. You come down. This is one space. This is the circular water body that you've seen up there, which is down underneath. In the museum is a circular chamber, which is devoid of any exhibits, but it's a space which is commemorative, where people would come and remember those who has lost their lives in the war. This is what you see from the X, the water body and the tower. And as you go down through the museum, one thing I must tell you, this project, though I was very happy to win it at a very young age, ended up taking up 16 years of my life. So it took 16 years to finish this project entirely, because when we started, the government at that point in time who was in power was for it. And then later on the government, when they lost and the new government came in, they were not interested at all. So the project got stalled for a few years, quite a few years. And then again the next government came in and they initiated the project. So that's how it took a while. So if you look at the building, it bears those history of being in a ruin for a long time, and you see the concrete is not as crisp as it should be. And we thought this is the story of the building, so it should remain the way it is. And the other thing that is important is that the government never made any initiative to document the whole history of liberation. So when we designed the building, when we went to look for what would be there in the museum, there was almost nothing. So we had to basically take all the elements, print them on glass, and created these panels. So these are all panels with glass standing there, and everything is printed on glass. And this is a dark area from where you enter into that chamber where the water is falling in, and this is the space which is commemorative of the lost souls. And then you come out and you go up through these spaces, through the stair, to the museum up there. So I'll show you a small video that we have to get an idea of the space. The Tower of Light, that's how we designed the Independence Tower. It was designed with glass, but glass was not the material. Our material was light. And the light, the only way to express light is through glass. That's why we took glass as a material. And the way it's designed is there's a space frame structure, and then the glass are stacked one top of the other. So there is thick glass, and the glasses, as you see here, are in section. These are all panels made out of, maybe the next image will show better. Here you see these are glasses stacked one top of the other. We created a panel and then we placed it on the space frame structure. So what it does is during daytime, when there's nice sunlight, it refracts light. And refraction is something we wanted because it gives a very interesting magical play. And during the evening, towards night, it's lit artificially, so it becomes a beacon of hope. It's a tower of light. And this is our 16th of December, our Victory Day, when we have celebration, and you can see the amount of people there. Another project, but this is a competition, pretty much close to that. As I mentioned, that the government never made any initiative to preserve the history of war. There is a trust that actually did that. So the trust created another Liberation War Museum, which is an actually authentic documentation of the whole war event that took place. And they actually opened a competition. And I did not win, but I would like to share with you the project, the way we designed it. So this is a site that was given to the trust, this Liberation War Trust, to create this museum. And the site is somewhere around here. And as the competition was declared, we went to see the site. It's the most unimpressive site I've ever been to. You know, if your site doesn't excite you, how do you do a building? So I thought, you know, for quite a while it was a dilemma whether I should participate, because you cannot bring out a design out of your head when you do not like your site, right? So So that was a bit of a problem. And for 2 weeks, I thought I should write to the government, ask them to change the site, give them a better site, which is, you know, much more appropriate for a project like this. But of course, that would not happen because they've already declared and these things were done. And so the idea that I came up with is that wars are not beautiful. So a building and the site is not beautiful either, the building doesn't need to be something aesthetically pleasing. It's not necessary. And also the fact that in our war, the war that we are trying to preserve here, has a very dark history of these killings and genocide. And most importantly, the killing of intellectuals, which has taken away a few generations from us. So what I came up with, because it's an urban site, we had some restrictions of land and everything. The idea was to take a rectangle, the way the site is, very, I don't know, the proportion came, whatever the proportion came out of the setbacks, and I created a rectangular hollow in the middle because of the maximum ground coverage that is required. And then I just made a cut, basically a cut that takes away out of this rectangular form, sort of a mutilated rectangle, so that it shows that it has taken away something from us. And that was the idea, that you take a rectangle and you chop off a certain part out of it. It still is as, retains its form, but at the same time, it takes away something. And that was the idea that I worked with, and I thought that it was quite interesting because the buildings that are surrounding it were actually government offices, passport office, a hospital, not at all befitting for a museum. So it needed to be something very monumental for me so that it creates its own presence. So these are some of the plans that you see, the museum plan. And as we did the cuts, the building went up. And so at the top, this is the auditorium, and on the top we have the museum. So this was the last floor that was left. And this was like a small tower that we created. The sections. And this was actually my proposal, that it would be very rough concrete, and the rectangle will be just a rectangle. And the courtyard from where you can see this taken away of the rectangular part. So I'll show you two more projects. The next project is actually, as I was talking about, this order in chaos. And also with that, this idea of engaging community. So these are the two projects where I have tried to engage community. And I think it's important because it gives them a sense of ownership, especially when you work with communities. So this is the mosque project, which is located right here. If you see, this is the city of Dhaka. This is the southern bank of the river, and this is actually the northern part. This river, tiny little river here, marks the end of Taka city. So the mosque is located in that area. Now, if you see these Google images, you see how the landscape is changing from 2004 to 2015. It used to be a farmland entirely, and then slowly it turned into settlements. People are growing, as the city is growing in a rapid speed. This area is from farmland turning into settlements. So this is basically a place in transition still. Not entirely built, but it is getting built. So that was something I had to keep in mind. This is the first initiation of the mosque, when it was declared that this ground is given to the mosque project. And so we had a small prayer under this jackfruit tree. Here you see my grandmother. That's when she was young. And that's when she was there in the groundbreaking ceremony, because she's the client of this project. Our family owned part of the land, and so she donated this land to build this mosque here, and she gave me the responsibility to build it. So that's how the project came to me. And of course it's an interesting project, and I took it on. Did some research, of course. Mosque is, especially in our country, or even in the Indian subcontinent, you don't see women going to mosques much. Yeah, there is no culture of going to mosques. My memory of going to a mosque would be as a very young child. We were sent to the mosque to learn Quran. I don't know what I learned, but it was a beautiful memory that you go there, you sit on the floor, and you listen to the recitation, which was really unique. And that's my only connection to mosque, actually, in Bangladesh. But of course, I've been to many other mosques which are uniquely beautiful. But what I did was, I went back to the very beginning of mosque. I questioned the morphology or the genesis, where it came from and how it came into being. So this is the first mosque of Islam, where you see that the mosque is actually coming out of a house form. It was just a basic space without any kind of elements on it, just a basic house form that was created as a space for congregation, where Muslims would gather, and they would gather to not only to pray, praying is an important part of it, but also to gather for different kind of communal activities, social activities. It was used as an administrative area, it was used for judiciary purposes, but then later on, as these things were taken away, only the prayer part remained. And that's where I questioned this whole notion of mosque, that you can still bring back the things that are lost. You may not bring back judiciary or administration, but you can definitely bring back the communal aspect. And since this mosque, as I said, that it's in a place which is entirely in a transition, which is from agricultural land turning into more of a settlement or a city or urban area, and there are lack of facilities, I thought this would be a fantastic opportunity to design it in a way that it's not only a place for prayer, but it's also a place for communal activities. So, of course, you've seen in Islamic culture, there are beautiful legacy of wonderful spiritual buildings, mosque in Cordoba, infinite space, beautiful magical light, Sophia, which is not really a mosque, a basilica, but again the spirituality is absolutely inspiring. And if you look into our own landscape, these are some of the Bengali mosques or mosques in Bengal during the Sultanate period, which is from the 13th to 14th century, where we had these beautiful brick mosques when Islam came into Bengal in the 14th century. And that's when these are probably the most authentic mosque forms that are there. And you don't see any dome or minaret in that sense. There are small ones, but not that pronounced. And so, and this is the situation now in Dhaka. These are the kind of mosques that you see. And even worse, I mean, see how the symbols are trying desperately hard to come out of. So that's the problem. You see, this is what is problem, because we try to identify ourselves with symbols, whereas religion is not about symbols. It's about the spirit. It's about something entirely different. So that's why I tried to create this connection between the old mosques that were our unique legacy and with something which is much more contemporary. If you see these plans here, these are kind of nice. This is a Buddhist monastery, the one I showed you earlier, an image. This is a Hindu temple. This is a mosque from the Sultanate period. This is, of course, our very favorite parliament building by Louis Khan. And this is the design that I came up with for my mosque. A square because of the site being a square. And the prayer hall, which is in the middle, shifts at a certain angle because it faces the Mecca. As you know, that mosques are always, especially prayer halls, are always in a certain direction. Prayers take place in a certain direction. And the rest of the edges are all ancillary facilities. So if you go closer to more detailed plans, this is the ground floor plan. You come up, this is where the colonnade arcade, where you enter. This is where the ablution is, the prayer hall. And these edge or corners are all open to sky, so there is light and ventilation. As I have mentioned, that's a very important part in my architecture. The building has to breathe naturally. It has to work on its own without any mechanical means. So, so you see here, this is basically the thing that all the edges are made out of brick, entirely brick, load-bearing structure, because concrete is expensive and I did not have a budget. My grandmother did give us a land and a small sum of money to initiate the project, but the rest of the money was raised as fund from the local community. So people who lives in that community, who are lower middle income families, gave money to the project, and that's how we built it. So I will just show you images of the project a little bit. One major element for me was not symbolic elements, but spirituality. And so, and also it worked well because we did not have enough fund, as I mentioned. Light was the only element we could work with because it comes for free, and we tried to make as best use of it as possible. So you see here how as the day changes, the light changes itself. Even better here, maybe. I think I'm running late, so I'm just going to go very, very fast. Okay, so you've already seen these images, I'm sure. The only interesting thing is here. The mosque being used as a... we had a nice lunch just before I came here. So this you see here that the mosque is being used as a kind of a community space as well. The last project, I'm going to go very quickly. So this is out of Dhaka. So all the images that you've seen so far are all Dhaka images. Now you see a beautiful Bangladesh. This is the southern part of Bangladesh, absolutely like a painting. This area, which is very dark, is actually the Sundarban. It's the largest mangrove forest in the world. And the Royal Bengal tigers are actually coming from here. And so this is a resort. The site is right here. So the client actually wanted, the idea is that the people will stay here in the resort and they will take a boat and come to the Sundarban, visit it and go back. So that was how the project was initiated. This is our site here. And you see how beautifully green the whole farmland is. I'll show you some images from the site. Agricultural land during the winter season becomes entirely yellow. Well, our winter. Yeah, it's funny, right? And still till date, you see cow carts. And it's an entirely different landscape from what you see in the city. And my dilemma was with this project that I am not taught to design anything in this landscape. The kind of education we get from the schools, especially from my Texas A&M background, I definitely was not ready to do any project in a landscape which is like this. Because in the city you can do a lot of different things, but what do you do here? The pace is entirely different, the language is different. So After quite a few times visiting the site, the idea that we came up with, and we talked to the client, that if you read here, this is one of my writings, rural Bangladesh is uniquely beautiful, the soul of the delta land. It felt like a crime to invade the silence of the roaring silence with the roaring noise of architecture. This project gives an opportunity to bring back the lost pride and belief in the wisdom of the land, created over hundreds of years of dwelling in the delta. This is something I wrote to my client, and the client agreed. So what we did is we started a research on how you build in the delta. It's to some extent learning architecture all over again. So what we did, we had a few interns coming in, summer interns coming in from Cornell University. If you're interested, you can come over too, if your summer months are free. So those students they stayed on site, they did an extensive study, worked with the villagers, and what they did is they came up with a report where it tells us how they construct their buildings, what makes them decide what rooms will be placed where. One interesting thing you'll see, because it's delta, it's flat. And because it's flat and at the same time it rains, and I mentioned that you need a mound or a plinth to create your building on, they dig ponds. The first thing of a house is to dig a pond. So when you dig a pond, you have some earth. You take that earth, you create a mound. And on the mound, you place your houses. So that's how we create our undulation. We don't have beautiful Alps, but we do have just a flat land. So we create our small mounds. So these are what you see here, a pond, a mound, and on the mound are the small houses. So then we took this, we took a village, and then we measured the villages, all the different elements of it. And you see that these are small huts, and they are gathered around courtyards, small courtyards. And they're not enclosed entirely, not distinctly defined, but flows from one space to the other. I'll show you the studies. These are all done by the students. And another interesting thing is this roof form, which is the Bangla roof. Bengali we call Bangla. Bangla is the word from where bungalow comes from. So all over the world, when you hear bungalow, remember it comes from Bangla. And Bangla roof is again a very unique feature that is not there anymore. It's sort of getting lost. We don't build that anymore, made out of thatch. So we thought of reviving that in a contemporary way. And this is an idyllic image of a village or a village home of every Bangladeshi child's mind. So this is something as a child I have also drawn. These are the different landscapes, and so this is the site, and we decided to bring people in with a boat, and that's how we started designing. The whole project is actually being designed with mud and bamboo, because that's the local material, and we're using thatch. And the whole project is what we've done is we've created these plans how the resort rooms will be and the bathroom and everything, but the rest of it is being built by the villagers. So this is one villager, a young boy. Generally these boys of this age have a dream to go to the city and get a job, struggle through all their lives. They really do not go anywhere. So we thought, let's just give them enough incentive to stay back in the village, so that they become our force who will work in the project. Not only in the construction, but later on, they can become the force for the resort. So the resort is not just a resort with a boundary or a gated community kind of a thing. It's something that is being done that is going to improve the entire neighborhood or the community. So this boy from a potter's village, that's his home. You see the pottery, that's his house, and that's his grandfather who has the skill or the knowledge of making pottery. So we've involved him here, and we are encouraging him to be involved in this whole process. So now we are building him a house, we are making a small, this wheel and a small space where the people or the guests who are coming to visit or stay in the resort can go and learn how to make pottery. And that would be an interesting thing because you then create a connection between the locals and the guests. This is our construction technique. As you see, what we've done is we've taken bricks, but not baked. We took it sun-dried. And we have used earth to create the mortar and plaster both. This is how it's constructed. You see the roof form. And it's entirely built by the villagers. So the villagers are coming in, they're making the buildings. So we've basically designed it and we've let them do it. So they're building this whole project. Our roof consultant, our organic farming consultant, our plaster consultant. And here are the consultants in a meeting. So I don't know if you call it architecture or not, but to me, at that point, at that site, it seemed to be the appropriate answer. And I didn't want me to be present, that's why I always claim in this project I'm invisible. As an architect, I am invisible. You don't see me anywhere. I'll end with a small ring. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. I'm sure you're burning to ask a few questions. Well, I have one.
Okay.
You told us in the beginning that you cannot draw a plan and assume that it will be built like on the drawing. And then you're showing us in your projects extremely complex wall surfaces, walls with a certain depths, walls where you start changing the direction of the bricks, etc. How do you communicate that?
Well, every site has a site engineer, we call it. So basically the site engineers are responsible for laying out. Once the layout is done, and we do a lot of samples on site, a lot of samples. So all the brickworks that you see are made on-site samples. We go and see and then improvise, work with the brick masons or whoever is, whatever material you're working with. So there's a lot of on-site work that goes on before you even go building it. We try out, if it doesn't work, then they tell you that no, this is not how you do it this way, let's try that. And so it's a both-way process. And that's how finally we come to a final sample, and then we go on doing it. But the layouts, if there's a complex layout, it's always, the engineers are there to see that it's done properly. But the materiality that you see are always developed with the masons or whoever is the skilled workers.
How long is the building process, for instance, for the
16
mosque?
Years. The mosque was built in 4 years. It took us for a small project, but it took us longer because we were running out of fund in the middle quite often. So we had to sit and wait for some fund to come in. So then when the fund was in, then we started again. So that's how it was back. Yeah. So it took us 4 years. Yeah. But the rest of it is more or less, the similar kind of thing. Yeah. Yes.
Hi Marina, my name is Gunta. I'm also a teacher here at the school. My question is towards like the context in which you work as a professional architect in Bangladesh. You were playing this little joke about your consultants of the last project, right, which are the people from the village itself, and then also we saw your projects, to which I think everyone here can relate very well in terms of their design and their expression. And then we see the context of Dhaka as a city, which is kind of like void of design, I would say. Maybe that's too much. So, are you like embedded into like a scene of architects? Are there many like architects who tackle tasks the way you do in Bangladesh? Or do you engage in professional discussion? Is there like a university with a big intellectual scene, or are you alone out there?
Yeah. No, I'm not alone. Well, of course we have a, I wouldn't say all, but we basically have about 2,000 architects altogether in Bangladesh. Among them, probably 500 to 600 practicing. And from them, I think we are quite a few who has a close group. Probably some of them you'll see in November when we have the exhibition. So we meet quite often. There is, on Tuesdays we have these events where after work everybody goes and there's somebody talking. That's how it started. So I don't get enough time to go there, but many of us still manages to go and spend some time. We have started an institute as so it's a Bengal Institute of Architecture, Landscape and Settlements. This is not an undergrad course, it's for architects. So architects can come and we give out different kind of workshops. We bring in professors from different places, architects, and even it's more of a multidisciplinary format where artists, architects, everybody comes together discussing different things and discourses. So there is a certain kind of culture that's growing, and as I mentioned, that it's a very young country, and we had a long lost intellectuals, which actually set us back quite a bit. So now the generation that you see, like me, I was born right before the war, but then again, you know, we are a kind of a generation that is coming up with different kind of works and activities, and I think there is an energy that is there at the moment. Yes. So we try to come together. Yes, we do. I think it's very important for any kind of architecture culture to grow that architects need to interact. Not only architects, also artists, musicians, filmmakers. I mean, it's nothing new. You see that in history, that's how it has happened. Yeah.
I have two sort of like side question. One is how many women are among those 500 practicing architects in Bangladesh?
About 40%, I would say.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you see in our schools there are more women than men. So soon enough, I think architecture is going to be women's profession. At least in Bangladesh.
Okay, and another question is very precise about one project. Why was it so important, while on a low budget, to make the prayer hall and the mosque out of concrete?
Yeah, well, because I didn't want, not just want, but it needed to be a column-free space. I didn't want any columns in the middle. So that's why you have to have concrete at some point in time, right? So yeah, so then that's why we used 8 columns. That was the maximum, and then of course the roof. So that is the minimum concrete I could use, and it had to be span, a large span. So that's the only reason why I have concrete. The rest is all brick. Yeah, it's $150,000. The whole project. And what's the average salary? Average salary for what? Average salary would be, let's say, 300 euros.
Hello,
Hi.
Marina. My name is Matthew. I'm also a teacher here. I have one question. I think for many people, maybe the only building that they know in Bangladesh is the Parliament building of Louis Khan. And you had a little bit of a wry smile in talking about the much beloved Parliament building. Can you describe the relationship or the importance of that building? Is it?
Yeah, okay. Well, you know, I grew up seeing that building as a building site because it was almost like a ruin after the war. For a while it was, so I've seen it growing from a ruin to a building. And even before I got into architecture in my high school, before the building was finished, I had a chance to visit it. So that was my first introduction to that building. And well, for me it was a very surreal space. You don't see that happening inside this large ambulatory space, which is 7-story high. Quite unique, and I think it remained like an impression in me. For most of the architects, especially when you get into architecture school, that's the building we are introduced to as architecture, because we have quite a few nice buildings from the 60s done by master architects, Paul Rudolph, and we have Stanley Tigerman working with Mazhar al-Islam. Mazhar al-Islam himself had a few buildings, wonderful buildings. But that building has a power, you know, it is very powerful presence in our landscape, in the cityscape. And as you go in and you've encountered this building, for me, especially I think after my school, that building actually taught me a lot of things. Scale, proportion, light, mostly. Khan's work, as you know, he has always aspired for timelessness. Timelessness is something you can only, what can I say, attempt, but it's only up to time whether it will be timeless or not. So those attempts, I think I have in many ways learned from Khan and Khan's buildings. I don't know how the other architects see it. Because Khan is not just about the facade or a few holes or circles and triangles, but it's much more deeper than that. So, but for me it has been an inspiration, definitely.
Well, thank you again, Marina,
Thank
for introducing us to your deeply inspiring work and the world of architecture.